He'll give to Mobley over right end. He busts through a hole, cuts it back at the 15, slips a tackle, and he'll score. Touchdown, Owls.
Welcome to How to Cook a Goose. We have our first guest.
Yeah.
It's Ryan Urqhart, my personal favorite play-by-play broadcaster ever. You may have heard him on American Conference games or the Florida Gators radio, and he's here today to talk all things play-by-play. He's also a fellow Gator and also worked with Will and I at some point at our first job where we met. The ties are tying today. I'm so excited to have you on, Ryan.
I'm so excited to be here. This is awesome. I adore both of you, and this is going to be so much fun. It's like we're back in college.
You got to give us your goose noise to get us kicked off, because it is the How to Cook a Goose podcast.
That's true. What is it, like a quack?
Or like a good honk.
That's fun.
Good one. Okay, so I want to start. You were probably one of the first play-by-play broadcasters I ever personally knew when we met. Can you tell us how you knew you wanted to do play-by-play?
Yeah, so it's funny because I wish I had some like cool like storybook sort of like, and it was in this moment I knew in 12th grade. It was kind of this like slow thing over time where as a kid I used to do public speaking competitions because I was cool and had like normal interests. And it started in like 5th grade, and I knew I really liked public speaking. And then I got like hyper fixated on Auburn football in middle school. I mean, it was like I could tell you so much lore about like the most random 7-5 Auburn teams from 2009. And you know, kind of over time, those two interests sort of fused together. And I kind of started to wonder, well, maybe I'd like to do TV stuff. And so I started doing that in high school. And then like the more college football I watched, the more I was like, like I really like talking. I never seem to stop, and I'm really into college football. So it'd be really cool if like to do this kind of job, like the announcers, like Brad Nessler or Brett Musburger at the time, or, name anybody, Vince Scully, like being able to do that kind of stuff. There was probably one moment where I think my mom knew, she always talks about it, where I used to fake commentate the old NCAA like 08, 09 video games, like for the Xbox. And so that was a moment where I think like she knew like, oh, we're gonna have like a TV person, but I sort of slowly figured it out over time. And then in college I kind of had a moment where I was like, yeah, I'm gonna commit to this. But
That is so cool. Do you like have a moment where watching sports went from I'm watching my favorite team to I'm watching the broadcast? Because I feel like I had that moment in high school when I figured out you could be a sideline reporter, and then I started watching TV differently, where I was like, oh, there is a person on the field that has a job that I want. Does that make sense?
yeah, you know what's funny is I don't think that moment came for me until probably some point mid-college. It might have actually been shortly after. Do you remember that it was like the first TV broadcast you and I worked together, that like freshman All-American FBU thing? It was in like
Yes.
2017. I remember because like you can consume sports as a fan and see what announcers do, right? And like have an idea of what it's like. And then when you do it for the first time, your perspective kind of shifts, and like it's only gotten more potent over time, this feeling, but you see the broadcast differently. You see it from more of a professional angle. And I think this goes for production people as well. Because I talk about it all the time with my coworkers, is like you notice things, or you understand the processes differently, or you understand like why the announcers were quiet for an extra 2 seconds during a moment. You pick up on these subtleties a lot more. And I think it does change over time when you like how you approach sports. But I would say it was shortly after like we did our first TV broadcast that like kind of that mental shift started to happen for me. And I think that's kind of cool. Like it allows you to watch sports in a different way.
Yeah, I remember that. That was put on by 11 Sports Network. I don't even know if they're still around.
No idea.
And where were we? We were somewhere in South Florida because I had to
Naples.
drive far. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we called, was that high school football? Younger?
It was is that, by the way, is that text notification coming through on your end?
No.
Okay, good. I had a really loud ding, and I didn't know if that was going to bother you guys. Anyway,
I'm here.
I remember it was Naples, and it was middle school football for like the majority of the games. But then there was like this all-American
Adidas. It was
like fresh,
Adidas.
yeah, the Adidas, like there was like, here's a bunch of middle schoolers, and then here's like the recruiting game where you felt like a significant vibe shift of
Yeah.
like, oh, there's kids here with like offers, like this is like we're starting to get up there. And you know what's funny? So obviously Ohio State just won the national title. I don't know if you remember this, Savannah, but Emeka Egbuka was on that team.
Yes.
And
Oh my gosh. I have
I
not
had
thought
a
about this
touchdown
in
call.
years.
Yeah, from 2017.
Do you
that I
have that
found.
call?
I do.
We gotta show it.
It's somewhere. It's buried in my like computer somewhere. I gotta go find
Okay.
it. But it's like this ancient call of like a ninth grade Emeka Egbuka, like just torching some poor DB. Like
That is awesome. No, I remember we got that. I had graduated in December of 2017. I
Mhm.
packed up my apartment, drove home to Lakeland, and then the following weekend, within days, drove and worked that gig with you. Because one of our professors, James Bates, set it up, and he was like,
Yep.
"You got to get in there and call games." And you had said the same thing to me. I genuinely remember us sitting at lunch and you looking at me. It's also the very beginning of our friendship, and you being like, "You need to take a deep breath because it's gonna be fine."
that
I
sounds
needed
like something
that.
I would do.
You did. You
I
did. I needed
well,
it too.
you know, here's what I also remember. Whoever, I think his name was Joe, our color analyst, got like his voice got torched like day one, and
Yes.
because he wasn't used to the volume of games or something. And so I think you and I had to like do play-by-play in color for like 3 or 4 of the games, and it was
I
just
knew
like,
nothing about football at the time.
yeah, that was the other. So I was like, it's this, like, like trying to like nudge
Look,
in certain directions and stuff. Yeah.
hey, that's a screen pass. That literally
And in
happened
your
on that
defense, like,
broadcast.
I was the same way, but with ball and stick sports. So we had a nice yin and yang of like lack of knowledge there, kind of feeding into each other.
When was your first time you ever did play-by-play? Was it in the elective or like the club in college?
I'm making sure my timelines are right.
Okay.
It was, yeah, so I still have my first audio broadcast. It was Florida UMass. It was the season opener in 2017. I did color on the student. It was the first ever student broadcast of football at Florida. They'd never done it before. Which was like kind of surprising to an extent. I think like I don't think anything like organized had ever existed like that. And then I did play-by-play for the first time like a couple weeks later. And that paired with some other connections I made doing production stuff there was what got me some of my first Learfield like radio work at Florida. So I still remember that UMass game though. Just because it was like the most boring game you could imagine. And trying to analyze like boring but still lopsided football was like, hi, welcome to the business. Here's like literally the hardest thing you could possibly do. Just like, how do you make Florida UMass interesting when it's like 17-7 and like UMass isn't moving the ball, but neither is Florida. So it's like, what are we doing? Yeah.
At what point did you feel like you started to really get good? Because I mean, I've seen your broadcasting career from the beginning, and just where you are now, it's just really amazing to see, like, just kind of coming into your voice and just you sound totally different, so much more professional, so much more well-rounded. I'm curious, like, was there a point where you were like, okay, I'm good at this now?
It's funny because I still don't feel that way. You know, I still it's and I think there's a healthy balance to strike here. And I think you guys will like you guys both will relate to me on this. Like every time it's like the goalposts always move when you go back and listen to yourself or look at your work from like 3 years ago. Where if you had asked me in like 2022, I would have said, you know, I feel like I'm like making good progress and I'm like really starting to come into my own and like but if I heard myself in 2019 and 2022, I would have been like, this is impossible to listen to. But in 2019 was when I like won this like national award for broadcasting, and I would have told you then, oh my God, I can't listen to my first broadcast from 2016. It's horrible. You know what I mean?
To keep
There's
going.
always this growth that's happening. And like I've heard professionals who are at ESPN talk about this, that yeah, I can't stand to listen to myself 3 years ago and I can't believe I was on linear. It's a good thing if you're feeling that way because you're still improving and you're still growing. That's what you're always striving for. I think I will say that there was a moment where I felt like I can do this. Like I can really make a career out of this is almost a better way. Like where, okay, I'm not going to be a struggling, trying to break in person forever. Like I can build something from this.
What was that moment of realization where you're like, this can be a career for me?
I think it was when I did the 2023 softball tournament for the American and it went well. And the reason I point to that moment was, getting work at like a school or getting work one place is one thing, right? Is that you can like make some money doing it, like you can kind of start to break in. But that was the first time it felt like it was like, okay, now I have a third thing and this is also growing and this is also in line with it. So it was like kind of, and since then it's grown into like I've done soccer with them twice, I've done baseball once, and still am involved with the conference and things like that and have good relationships there, and did football twice this year, and kind of got my feet wet with that for the first time. I think between that to football is where my confidence has grown that this is where I'm meant to be. And it was that sort of, you're starting to do stuff that's beyond just, yeah, I work with one school or I work in this one place. It's that things have really expanded from that, and you're getting that feedback from multiple points of, yeah, we like you, we want to use you, we want you involved with our product, which is really cool to feel. And it feels like you're continuing to grow in your career in a positive way, that you can do that in multiple aspects, being at one place and being involved with a school like USF, who's been tremendous, and then being involved adjacently with the conference as well. Those things sort of really build your confidence that you have a place and you carved out, a corner of this business that you can grow in.
That's amazing.
That's interesting. I think too, what comes to mind about doing play-by-play as well, like I think there are baseline things that go like, you are good at this, but there's always going to be a level of like objectivity of like if someone likes you or not. And I feel like that sometimes can be really tough for anybody who works on the front end of things, of like, does someone like your voice? Does someone like the way that you say things or how you handle moments? And like getting those gigs where someone worked with you on baseball, and then they recommended you to someone else, and then they saw your stuff and they go, oh, I like that guy. Like when you start getting those gigs, they, to me, feel very different of like, agree, like what you said, like, okay, I can do this. Like I'm going somewhere.
That happened to me recently where I got, for the first time, somebody who I only have like met a few times in passing recommended me for a gig in Fort Myers doing like women's basketball. And I got to do like the South Carolina Gamecocks, like Dawn Staley's team, like talking to her and this team, like through a recommendation of someone who had like just heard my stuff for the most part. That was really cool. Something else I'll add to it too was the confidence for me of knowing I could do this actually came from me getting laid off. I would also point to that moment because there was about a 2-week period. So for context, my first job was doing like this high school sports broadcast at a school. It was like in association with basically the Tampa Bay Lightning. This job is what helped get me connected at USF. So it was really great in that way for my career growth, like tremendous people. But around 2022, they did some restructuring and they decided to cut this element out. And so my position got eliminated. And I had about like maybe a 2 to 4 week, like, can I do this? Like, am I good enough to be doing this? And I'm really lucky that I had some amazing people in my corner who didn't let me stay in that place very long. Kyle Crooks was like a really good one where I remember we had a really long conversation where he unwaveringly was like, trust the process. Like, you're supposed to be here. Like, you don't need to like jump ship. Like, everything's going to work out. And everything did work out. And it's like, I remember I had a moment when USF won the regular season title in basketball where I just kind of looked around and like the confetti's falling and it was like this magical run of a season. And I like was on the call for it. I'm just looking around like, holy cow, like this is less than 2 years later. It's like, and that was kind of there's been little moments along the way, but I kind of thought of that too when you talked about the negative feedback we sometimes get of those moments where it feels like failure. A lot of times can really illuminate where you're supposed to be or where you belong or what really matters to you. And I feel like that was a critical step on my journey to like becoming a better broadcaster, understanding that, yeah, you can get like punched in the gut, but like you're going to make it through. It's not going to knock you off.
I feel like those relationships that you have in the business that are those sounding boards, and oftentimes like your cheerleaders are so important. Like you're one of mine. In so
And
much
you're
of my work.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like you build those, and like there have been so many times where we've talked where, and I don't even think sometimes we notice when we do it for others, when we just tell someone like, oh, I really liked that call, or even just like, oh, I think, you would be really good at that, or hey, like you'll be fine, get in there and do it. Like without those, this business, I think, is impossible to move through because you need people who have been in it that you trust their voice in your ear. Yeah, having people who do that at the right time will make or break a career.
I think too, like it's such a small business, but it's a small business that's really competitive, but it's also really friendly at the same time. Like that's the odd thing. It's very competitive and like cutthroat to an extent, but like at the same time, I mean, I have built relationships with people who work like at ESPN or who are like voices of like Major League Baseball teams that are like incredibly nice and incredibly generous with their time and want to give back. And I think it's because when you get to that point, and I even feel it sometimes doing like the USF stuff where I have students who reach out to me and they want feedback of, even if you're not all the way up there, you still want to like kind of help people up the ladder behind you because you know how hard it is. And I think that culture is one of the really big bright spots of doing this is I've never felt anybody in front of me has like really had any ill will or any desire to like keep me beneath them. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of everybody wants to pull everybody else up, which I think is really cool.
There's a culture of paying it forward in our business that is really incredible that you don't see in a lot of other businesses that are as highly competitive as ours. And I think it's funny because when I think about other video editors that I met when I was doing video editing full time, like I would give them all the tricks of the trade so that way in my own mind, I'm in competition with them. I'd be like, I gave you all the secret sauce and in my mind, I'm still going to try to make a better video than you. So, you help each other out, but it honestly feels like that healthy competition that keeps you sharp and wanting to improve your skills.
And the thing is there's no finite does not really exist. Like it does and it doesn't. Like, yeah, sure, there's only so many sports broadcasts in a day. There's only so many social posts that go out. There's only so much content that gets posted. But like at the end of the day, I think that there's this mindset that there is work out there for those who are hungry to go find it. And I think that there's a respect for people who go out and find it and make it happen. And so there's this sort of, I know you're as driven as I am. So I want to help you succeed because I know that helps me succeed because we might have to work together one day.
Yep.
It's a tiny business.
You might hook someone up with an opportunity and then 2 or 3 years down the line, they get you back. And like, that's why it's so rewarding. It's so worthwhile to be good to people in this business because things like that come back around full circle. I mean, people that I've met in this business that are nasty and, don't follow that culture of kind of paying it forward, they don't usually last in the business that long.
Mm-mm.
Or if they do, they get like into a very specific kind of corner.
Yeah.
They get stuck somewhere and they can't get out. And it's like, well, because you've burned too many bridges or you haven't, you haven't sort of put yourself in a position for people to want to give you the next step up. Or like reference you for the next opportunity. Because I mean, it literally half the time, I can't tell you how many times I've received it. It happened to me this past week where like basically somebody came down with like an opportunity I would have killed for 3 years ago and was like, hey, I like need a guy. And it's like, it wasn't, I need Brad Nessler. It was, I need someone who can like do this and not mess it up. And like, it is mind-boggling how much of this industry boils down to one person being like, yeah, can you just make sure I don't get an angry email? Like, do you just have like a person? And then there's just this army of like extremely hungry like people who would like do anything. You know what I mean? And it's like, they don't like, well, I know one guy, and this guy's pretty cool. And then that's like a massive career opportunity for them.
Yep.
Yeah, that is so funny. I feel like I've been experiencing that a lot lately of like, last year, us doing the American Baseball Conference Championships. At any given period of time, I would have done anything to do that job, to do a college baseball, a championship is on the line, like days on end with the same team, like that. When I think about like graduating, me would have like salivated for that. And then when it came down to it, was just the right people, people on the production side, people on like the broadcast side in the booth, all going, yeah, we like her. Let's give her a call. And it's that simple. And it almost sometimes makes me lose my mind because you feel like when you're in the position of trying to move up, it's like chess piece and a step here and a step here. And if I can just get in there. And sometimes it's like, hey, you around?
Yeah, I feel like so rarely somebody's like, I looked at their reel and I really liked their command of the broadcast. I feel like they use a good mix of vocabulary. And that sideline, she asks really intuitive and intriguing questions. And look at that follow-up. Like, I think from a technical standpoint, she was really like, no, it boils down to like, yeah, no, honestly, I hung out with her at the crew lunch and like, she was cool. She was like really cool. Like, we both Rays fans. Like, I still bring her back. Like, that's literally
so
what it boils
true.
down to all the time. Or it's just someone else being like, oh, yeah, no, she's cool. Let's do it. Like, it's that's it. It's like it's the beauty and the frustration of it, where it's like this whole thing is built on like the power of friendship, but it's also like sometimes you're like, man, I really wish I had a little more power of friendship,
Yeah.
So true. So true.
That's when I think about even hearing your story of stepping into your first job, which by the way was not a full-time play-by-play job. It was like social and kind of marketing too, right?
Boy, I did that. I loved that job so much because it was simultaneously the perfect first step for a like recent college grad or a soon to be college grad. And like just the most unhinged, like the way I would oscillate between like, yes, let me construct this very curated like product for broadcast where I'm like making sure we satisfy our advertising needs alongside like producing something that really highlights a community aspect to like, here is 47 Tampa Bay Lightning memes that were not approved by more than one person. Like, and they're going on like just no one would, or like, hey Ryan, we're shooting a video today and we need you to say flat F Friday on camera, like full bore, we're gonna censor it, or like we're gonna do like a skit that's gonna take 4 hours of your day. And I'm just like, you know what, it's fine, let's do it, full send. And every time it was glorious. And it was like we were definitely like the rambunctious rebel group of like Emily Arena, where it's like, yes, like here's all these very normal corporate functions, and then them. It's like video.
Going
That's
off script
crazy.
can really yield like some of the best stuff.
Well, it's funny because the best piece of advice I ever got, it came from my mom, because I love her and she's great. But it's that imperfection is perfection, and that there's a sense of authenticity. And this applies to play-by-play, sideline content, anything in life, really, I found applies to this. But if you learn to live in imperfection, you will curate perfection. That is the real human experience of it all.
Wow,
Yeah.
Well said. Mama
I
Urqhart,
love that.
man.
She's great.
I know. Last week it was my mom. This week it's Ryan's mom.
And Mom, if you're watching this, I need some advice.
I think though, what oftentimes when we talk about advice and like when people who are like younger than you or in college start to reach out, like the thing that I feel like I often tell them is that your first job and possibly even your second job are not going to be on camera full time. If they are, you had a crazy, crazy luck of the draw, or you went to local news, which God bless you, because I'm not doing it.
Yeah, there are some heroes in local news. I mean, it is a grind with a capital G. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a
But you
question.
take jobs that are adjacent. Sorry, Will.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just to get in and get the opportunity, and then it works out. I mean, yeah, I had my same moments where I was like running around in an Eagles mascot, and I just wanted to be a sideline reporter.
That was the one place where like the three of us were all in one place. I think it was like summer of 2019 where like they brought me in as like kind of a faux intern or like part-timer to like just do everything. And then I remember Will was there and you were there. Like I think you both were full-time, or one of you was full-time. I forget what the exact situation was, but I just remember that like it was right before I got hired at my first job. And I just remember it was like a 4 week of like, yeah, I have no idea what's going to happen today, but I'm just going to show up and see what happens.
That was
all of our
that entire
experiences, I would
job.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but we were doing various stuff. Like some days I was like shooting like packages, and then the next day I was like editing like in After Effects, making like motion graphics. Like it was a journey. But I think that is the perfect epitome of like, yeah, if you think you're gonna like walk out and be doing like, you know, ESPN Plus shows like day one, that just isn't realistic. You're gonna do other stuff because, okay, well, we let you do this. Like my first job, I was doing the high school stuff, and I'll never forget. I get this email like, "Hey, are you free for 5 minutes? We need you to write an ad for Lightning Radio and voice it over." And I'm like, first of all, that's not a 5 minute task. Second of all, that is definitely not. And then I like recorded it on my voice note, and then like a day or two later, I was like, I'm just gonna throw on the Lightning stream and see. It was within 10 minutes I heard it, and it was like one of the regular like commercials that looped through, and I was like, I recorded this on voice note. Like this was off my phone. Like I thought that kind of moment would have been in like a recording booth or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was done like like in the same like breath as like where I like was playing like Among Us. Like it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
on the same device, like in the same childhood bedroom I was in at the time. Like it was surreal.
Yeah. Will, what were you gonna ask? You had a question teed up.
Yeah, I did. So this podcast is the first time I've really sat here and talked in front of a microphone. So as two professionals that sit behind a microphone, I had a couple questions that I think would be good for, you know, this podcast is geared towards people that are young in school trying to break into the industry, I would say. I think a lot of times people watch a broadcast and they don't really know the difference between play-by-play and color. They just think it's two different people on a mic talking. So from Savanna as experience with color, Ryan as experience in play-by-play, I'd love to know like what are the real differences in the two different roles on screen and as far as like what goes into the preparation.
Good question.
Matt,
Ryan, you
first?
got it. No,
Mario?
you go.
So for those who aren't aware, it's the color analyst that comes from like old timey like baseball radio, because the old analogy was the play-by-play draws the picture and the analyst colors it in. So you're adding that depth, that extra like thought, you know. So your play-by-play guy, I always tell like whenever I'm like dating someone new or whenever I'm like meeting a new friend and they ask like, what do you do? I always say like, you know, do you watch a lot of sports? You know, the guy who's like yelling when stuff happens on TV? I'm that guy. Versus they're like, oh, you're not like Tony Romo. I'm like, actually, I'm like the guy talking to Tony Romo. You know, that's the role of the play-by-play. But it's the best analogy I've heard from an insider business perspective is you're the quarterback. Erin Andrews said that at I forget what it was technically, but she was just like speaking to Florida students. But I remember I asked her, it was like some question of like how to be a good play-by-play for Sidelines. And she talked about that you're the quarterback and the producer's the coach, and it's your job to delegate and distribute. You know, you are trying to be like Tom Brady, or, you know, you're trying to be kind of a game manager in some regard, where my job is to check it down to Savanna or like try and like lob up something like, you know, a good over the top ball for my analyst to the sideline, metaphorically speaking. I was a lineman. I can't throw. But I think as a play-by-play, your prep, to your question, Will, is much more rooted in creating avenues and creating talking points. You know, when I'm doing research, it's very people say, oh, you look up the stats. And I'm like, the stats are kind of what I'm finding as I'm trying to construct narratives. I'm trying to construct what is our story, right? Because let's say I can give you a stat that a basketball player has hit 50 straight on the free throw line. It's a cool stat. Okay, let's go a little deeper. Is there a reason behind this? So you talk to the coach. Hey, you know, I know she's on this crazy free throw streak. He's like, and then the coach will say something like, yeah, man, he came in the gym this summer and he was doing 3 sessions a day, just free throws. I mean, I had to kick him out of the gym multiple times because he was there after security left, you know, and he was setting the alarm off. Okay, boom, we've got our story. So then you work that nugget and he goes to the free throw line, you know, and Jack Smith has hit 50 straight free throws. You know, Savannah, we were talking to the coaches this week, and you tell the nugget, and then you ask, and then that's when you're giving your lead to your analyst who's going to take the baton, because you're saying something like, you know, and that's the kind of dedication you need to improve in this very critical aspect of the game. Savanna takes it, boom. Yeah, I remember when I was a player, or, this is the kind of stuff that coaches really emphasize is important to the culture of the program. You're always doing this sort of rhythmic back and forth toss.
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh, wait, the sideline has something they want to chime in. They communicate that to us. We tee her up. And that's how you're building that flow. But everything started from you're hunting for stuff that creates narrative, that creates good talking points, that creates good conversation. And as an analyst, you're sort of making yourself knowledgeable on some of the same things, but I think you'd agree, and it's a little bit more abstract in some ways, because every time I've done analyst, it's a lot, the prep is just a little bit like less concrete, which is the fun challenge of it, is there's some schematic, there's some stuff you would expect, but then there's kind of some more abstract like approach to it you have to take.
Yeah, I think when I first did color, because that was a huge transition for me to go from sideline of getting 45 seconds to talk, maybe 4 times if I'm lucky in a broadcast, to constantly talking. And that was really overwhelming for me when I first started prep of like, what am I going to say? But then from there, particularly doing basketball, because that's the thing that I do most consistently, it's being able to break down really why the game is going one way or another, which you can only do so much prep for. So especially when I was first getting started and doing a team I wasn't familiar with, I went back and watched old game film just because I had to feel good about it. And I could see like, oh, they play really well in a zone, or if this player has an off night, the offense collapses. And so you kind of take those stats, like the one I did this past weekend was one of the main 3-point shooters for the Bulls women's team was 1 for 17 the game before. It was really tough on everybody else on the floor when she's not active. And then when you have a game where she gets really good looks and great shots, the whole offense flows better. So it's my job to like explain that to the show. And then I think the thing about play-by-play, because that's still something that I have not stepped into doing, I really want to, is how, and I'd say this like as a genuine question on the show, but also just like in my awe of like your work, how do you sequence what you say? Like you just know it of like time on the clock, this person to this person. Like that is so hard to me. I cannot get that down.
I think... So I remember there's this like online tool. It's from an organization called SCA. It's the like play-by-play pyramid, and it gives you the basics. And it's more geared towards radio, and that's why I always said radio was a good place for people to start, because that's where you carve out your understanding of those kind of basics of like, okay, how am I? What do I actually say in any given moment? Because it's funny. A lot of people like kind of have this view of announcing of like, oh, well, you hop in and talk. There's not this kind of understanding until you do it for the first time. And you're like, oh, this game is happening whether I talk or not.
Yes.
And the sports don't act the same. Like,
no.
Calling basketball feels a heck of a lot different than calling baseball, softball, or like tennis. Like it's like 2 completely different jobs. Like, or if it's, oh, I'm doing volleyball on the radio. Congratulations, buddy. I hope you can talk fast. Versus like when I'm doing softball games with Florida, it's like, all right, everybody, gather around the fire. Between the first and second, I'll be regaling you with 5 years ago. Like, there's just such a wild, vast difference in how you approach like any given like game. And sometimes even within a single game, because you and I did a game together this year, Savanna, that was like Jose Fernandez walked into the post game, looked at us, and like acknowledged like, boy, that must have been like a tough game to call because of how slow the game was.
It was like, so hard, so disjointed. We never got in a flow because the ball game never got in a flow. That was hard.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is sometimes the game's going to be mean to you because like I can't tell you how many times I've been like, all right, I'm about to pop off like the best story I got from shoot around today. This thing's going to be a banger. And then like all of a sudden out of nowhere, like a 6'11" forward's like, windmill 360 dunk, anybody? It's like, man. I was like, so we're at shoot around this week. Here comes Reynolds. Like, you have to like stop everything you're doing and acknowledge the fact that it's like, oh yes, here's the Sports Center top 10 play. Like, you always kind of have to be on your toes for that stuff. But to actually answer your question and not just like kind of get into the like craziness of it all, is that It starts with like you really have to like get your reps in and build your lumps. That's why like whenever I talk to like students, I'm like, you have to get your reps in, like even if it's just you like alone in like a baseball, like a high school baseball press box, like doing it into your phone, because you have to learn, okay, I have to remember to reset the count. I have to do inning and score. I have to do this. Like, and it's building blocks and habits. Yeah, because once you're in the habit of like doing inning and score, doing the balls and strikes gets easier. Okay, I'm in the habit of that. All right, now I can work on saying more than just ground ball, line drive, fly ball when it comes off the bat. Now I can start working on my vocab. Now instead of saying it's a single, I can say it's a base hit, or instead of a double, I can say it's a two bagger. Or you start to build on these things. You could expand your vocabulary. Okay, now I know the pace of this game. I know that I've got an extra 3 seconds till this pitch comes in because the pace of this pitcher. Like, you kind of just start to build an instinct out of habit, and then it flows naturally. Like at this point, like I talk about it all the time, that it's like there's sort of an autopilot, and whenever big calls happen, I black out, and usually one of the first things I do is I hit the talkback button to my producer. I'm like, did that make sense? Because I don't remember what I say on a big call. It just comes out of my mouth, and I'm like crossing my fingers that it sounds good. Like very rarely do I like know what I'm going to say. Like sometimes for like a big, like they're going to win a championship moment, like I have a phrase I know I'm going to hit, but it's not always like, yes, I've scripted out the exact perfect call for like a game-winning 3. It's like, oh, nope, time to just like hope I get the player's name right.
Wow.
The building block analogy is the best I have ever heard play-by-play explained. And the funny thing is like, I know you called, some of your big college football games this season and like showed up on the ESPN press room list. Like that's a huge moment. But was it this season or last season? You texted me and you were like, hey, I've got a free booth at USF. I am going to record myself calling the it was USF Alabama. Do you want to come? It would really make my day easier if I just had someone to talk back and forth with. It doesn't even have to be great. Like I just need someone to be in the booth with me while I personally record it to practice. And that was what you did with that Saturday. And I remember that was kind of my first time ever really stepping into college football pace. And you were like, we were in the third quarter and you're like, you want to call this drive? I was like, yeah, I'll try. I was out of breath. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot keep up with this. Like, this is so much harder than it seems. Especially because so much of any time I'd done that had been bat and ball sports, which are so much slower. And I was like, how are you doing this? And you were like, it's just a repetition. Like, I'm not thinking about it.
Football specifically is such a march too, that like even I'm still learning the pace of football to an extent of like, the analogy is always like basketball's like jazz, football's like a march, and then baseball story time. It's like there's such a different flow. Like baseball is more like a podcast when you do on radio. Same with softball. Like it is like, all right, we're doing baseball or softball, but like, what's your opinion on the Toy Story movies? Like there's that's a conversation I've had on air before. But I think like when you like look at something like football, right, is like that's a good example of like also that USF. We also happen to be doing that USF Alabama game where like USF randomly was like, what if we push this like elite dynasty like to the brink for no reason? And it was like,
and it poured down rain.
Yeah, it was pouring rain. I think we sat through a rain delay, but like it was phenomenal. It was a good time. But that's the thing, is it's doing that stuff when nobody's looking. That's what separates you, and that's why I'm always like hammering it to anybody who's like young. It's like you have to get in there and like you got to do it. You can't watch, listen, learn your way into this. You can't network your way into having the reps, because your reel is what's going to speak for you at the end of the day. And people will see potential. People will see drive. It's not that you have to be perfect on day one to get into this business, but you have to have the habits of getting better. That's going to put you in better positions for when I did that AAC softball tournament, it was kind of a little bit of a like, all right, we'll let you have this sort of, I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. It was more of like the conference was like, yeah, okay, like we'll give them a shot, like doing the AAC softball tournament. And then they really liked me. And I remember they told me after the first day, like, hey, we really liked what you did yesterday. Like, we're definitely gonna stay in touch, all this stuff. But that was a function of all the work that had come before it. being in a position where you can make that kind of impression. You know, because getting one-off opportunities are one thing, but building on them does require sort of that, like, what's that old Vince Lombardi quote where it's like, luck is when like practice meets preparation, or like what, I don't remember the exact words, but it's something to that effect, where it's like your preparation meets the moment, and that's what luck is, or something, you know?
Yeah. What is your wildest or craziest broadcast? Do you have one that comes to mind?
So, I wonder if I should tell this story. So, I think it's fun. So, as we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, one of my main gigs I do is I'm part of the Florida softball radio team with like a little bit of TV here and there. So me and Kyle Crooks are on a lot of the Florida softball games together for radio, and so we travel a lot, we go places. One of the easy trips is usually Florida State. I'm going to preface this with, like, Florida State's great to work with. They were phenomenal. They were phenomenal this day. They like are extremely accommodating. Like, their ACC network people are awesome. All this stuff. Like, it's nothing to do with Florida State. But the function of the facility is that when Florida goes there, Florida State brings in softball radio. Like, they only have it for a few games a year. So in that game, the radio booth gets occupied. And then the TV booth has like Beth Mowins in it. So, you know, we're booted. And there's only 2 booths. So they have to put us somewhere. And it used to be they put us in right field, which was interesting, having to call a game from down the left field line. That was... Side note, there was one time, I forget which one of us said it, but it was like, and that ball's outside for, you know, strike 2 or whatever. Like, whatever it was on TV, it was like inside of our hands, and we called it outside because we're literally looking horizontal with the batter. Like, we can see the full script of the jersey. Like, we were just guessing. Like, we were just crossing, and we don't have a monitor, so we're just guessing. But anyways, I'm getting off the main story here, which is that this was last year. So Florida's at Florida State. It's the second game of the season. And because of the function of the way the stadium's built, they have to put us at these sort of like, it's like a high table you'd kind of lean against if you're at a ballpark, where like the seats are right in front of us. So I'm within 2 feet of like the very back row of like the lower stands of the softball facility. Like the concourse. Of
the fans.
Like, we are in the concourse. And like,
okay.
And we have like kind of a roped off area because in the past, like, people try to come up and talk to us, which is just like, they're friendly, but like not now. And we got like a tent, like, you know, and we've got enough space to like function. The downside of this is, like, you are not just broadcasting to your listeners, you are broadcasting to the fans at this game who are your arch rivals. So I am like, we are in the middle of Florida State fans. And fun fact about me, and you guys know this because you've talked to me in person, my voice carries. Like, it is not quiet, especially when I'm like getting into another big call. So like, in the past, we've run into funny moments where like the stadium's dead quiet and you can just like hear me like ripping a home run call to take the lead. And like you can just feel the tension between us and the crowd of like, they don't like that we're there. And we're just like, hey guys. So fast forward to this past year, I should say. We're at Florida State and it's like a crazy game, back and forth. It goes to 11 innings. There's like a game-saving double play from Kendra Falvey. She hits like a go-ahead home run and then turns this crazy outfield double play to win. And like, me and Kyle are going like ballistic because this is like a win. Like, Florida State had like run-ruled Florida at home, so like we got him back in Tallahassee and it felt good. Throughout this entire game, there was a specific fan in front of me and Kyle that was not pleased that her seats were in front of us. Like, there was a lot of just like bitter looks and like stuff, and it was like brewing, and she was kind of like, we could like vaguely hear her talking about us like in the background through the broadcast. Me and him thought it was hilarious. Like, we thought this was like the funniest thing ever. So fast forward to end of the game. It's an electric double play to end it in 11 innings. We win by a run. Kyle's like ripping the call. Like, he's killing it. He's like nailing it. And the Florida State fans are like standing up to leave. And she turns around and throws a hot dog wrapper at Kyle. And I have video of it because we always, like, on these big games, like, I'll flip the camera around to get like a booth cam for social. So somewhere, and we never posted it because we never wanted to like throw their, you know what I mean? Like, we didn't want to like spark drama, but it was funny to us because it's like this random lady turned around and threw a hot dog wrapper at Kyle. You can see him turn at me and like trying not to laugh in the middle of this massive, like, we won the game call. And in the vague background, you can hear something to the effect of, I have had to listen to this all night, and she sticks like her hands out like this as she's like walking out. And me and Kyle are just like exchanging looks, and we're just like, man, beating Florida State feels good, but it feels a little extra good when you're like actually there. Like it was this, like it made it kind of fun in a way. And like, I mean, nobody was ever like actually rude in any meaningful way, but it was like this rivalry, like this little rivalry.
Oh yeah.
Of like, I mean, we can survive a hot dog wrapper, it's fine, but it was just like, it created this like insane wild moment where it was just like, man, this really is a rivalry, you know?
So good. And it's like, and hey, go Gators.
And go Gators. I mean, that was definitely like a, like, you know, normally we're pretty like professional, like buttoned up in a lot of ways, but like that one also had a little bit of like scoreboard, you know?
That is hilarious. I have to know.
One of my favorite radio stories I've ever heard. Sorry, go ahead, Will.
That's hysterical. So I have to know, like, on the same train of thought, this is something that I've been wondering, because I mean, you got to think, for me, I'm used to being behind the camera, so my brain is always spinning on like making sure the on-camera people look good and whatnot, but I'm never usually thinking about the way that they're preparing to be on camera. So in the same light of what you just said, I always need to know, like, whenever something's happening in broadcast and something unexpected happens and the broadcast just goes like quiet, it's like, I know they're not just sitting there in silence. So like, I need to know, what do y'all say when you mute your mic in the midst of like a drama, and like what conversations really get had when you press the mute button and are just talking to each other when you're not on air? I need to know.
So to clarify, are you talking about like when the game, like we're still, like we're not in commercial break, like we're still on air and like the mics go
in
quiet?
The game? Because we've seen broadcasts where like something happens and it's either funny or like unexpected, and instead of the broadcast just kind of continuing on as normal, it'll just be silent. And it's like, you're like, they're either cracking up in the booth or they're like figuring out how
they've got the finger on the cough. Yes,
so
finger is on the cough button.
Yeah, for the uninitiated, if you're in TV specifically, they give you this like little black box, and it's got two buttons on it. One says cough, one says talk back. The cough one just mutes you so you can cough, typically. And the other one's talk back, so you can talk back to your producer. It's like a line back into the control room. So usually, like if I had to power rank it, if you like hear announcers go quiet and like something random just happened that's like funny, they're laughing. They're 100% laughing, but in a way that they don't want you to hear them laughing because it would come off as unprofessional. So like, that's number one. Number two is they're looking at each other and like they're talking to something, or they're like trying to communicate something. Or three, the producer said something in their ear and they're trying not to laugh and they're talking back with their producer. Because there are producers and directors that are diabolical. They will say things in your ear that you are like fighting through tears not to like giggle on air. Because like to them, this is another day at the office and they think it's funny to mess with you. Meanwhile, like there are thousands of people watching. You've got somebody in your ear that's like the two Muppet characters, like the two old guys just like popping comments back and forth. But yeah, no, most of the time it's laughing, which I have another wild story for you off of this if you'd like to hear it.
Yes, please.
So I'm going to preface this story, too, with it was completely safe. The production dude did an incredible job setting this up. It was really innovative, and it helped us do a successful tennis broadcast. You may have seen it if you've, like, been around a sports, like, event before, but I know you guys know the lifts that camera operators use. Like, they're typically the same ones that people use when they're, like, working on electrical, like, wires, like the ones that run along the road. They have to wobble a little bit in the wind because that's how engineering works. Like, you don't want it to be stiff. You want it to have some give. So we had to do a tennis broadcast at USF, but the issue is that there's like 6 courts and there's not really a vantage point where you could see everything. So they had this really good idea that did work where they put us on one of those lifts. Will, I know you'd be unfazed by it because I'm sure you've been on them before, plenty. And like, but me, I had never been on one. And for those who don't know, I'm about like 6'4", 285 pounds. Like I'm a bigger guy. So like we're sitting here. It's me and a colleague of mine, and I'm playing the role of color analyst. And like, it's the middle of like an April day, and it's like, there's not very much wind, but man, if I even like scoot in my chair a little bit, the whole thing's like tilting back and forth. And I'm just like, I remember vividly the first time I did it. As soon as I moved, I hit the talkback button, and I was just like, guys, if I die, like I go out doing what I love because it was like it was the whole thing was like moving. And again, it was very sound. This is like someone experiencing turbulence for the first time on an airplane, except in this case, it was like me on like a lift. But it was like still the most like interesting broadcast I've ever done, just from the standpoint of like I've never like gone up in a lift and had to simultaneously like cope with my fear of heights while also having to be on air. Like that was like an interesting like juxtaposition. It was really innovative, but like just the fact that like every time I like scooched a little bit to adjust, it was like, oh no, the lift's tilting around a little.
That's wild.
It
That
was
is
fun,
wild.
though. Yeah, no, it was a good time. We were up there for a couple hours doing that game. It was interesting. It was the most unique press box I've been in.
Wow.
Again, this was very safe. I'm scared of airplane turbulence too. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh my God.
Okay, I have one more follow-up that I need to know about because I'm just very intrigued by just the whole on-camera thing. Dealing with unexpected situations, so like maybe scary injuries, a streaker, teams fighting, brawls, like things that you're not normally accounting for going on in a broadcast. Like, how do you just stay composed, and how do you know where that line is? Because sometimes when things will happen unexpected like that, the broadcast will not want to cover it. But then sometimes it's too much is happening to ignore it, so you kind of have to address it. And doing that and figuring all of that out in real time. Like, tell me about that. Is that difficult? Have you had to experience anything like that?
I've experienced it, and I think it might be one of the hardest parts of doing this because we exist in sort of a candy shop of sorts, right? Where things are usually like very fun, very lighthearted, but those moments come like, you know, like you mentioned injuries, right? Injuries are always the toughest to navigate because you obviously don't want to sit there and speculate on it. You don't know anything yet. You don't want to like dramatize it because that's kind of like inconsiderate to the athlete, right? Like you don't know what's happening, but you have to address it. Like it's important. Typically, it's one of those things I found. It's either you acknowledge it, and this is like TV will take a break, or it's you acknowledge it, and then, you know, while they tend to them, you kind of shift the topic away, and you don't make it like like you don't revel in it per se. But then you get other situations you mentioned, like fighting is one that you have to be active in it because I remember we had a conference one time that involved ESPN and the conference where they like come down and they give this like seminar and like we ask questions and stuff. And I asked about how do you want us to handle situations where like say a brawl breaks out, like both benches clear, right? And they were like, well, from a production standpoint, we can't cut away because like, or at the very least, we're going to have cameras in the background on it because the police might need that later. Like if people start pressing charges, like that's evidence. And then it's also like, you don't want to completely ignore it because like, that's now the story. Yeah. A brawl broke out. Now I personally do not think glorifying it is really a good idea or like making light of it. You know, it's like one of those, to me, it's one of those things like, this is not, you don't want this. Like you kind of want to acknowledge it, right? Of like, and you know, and there's some extracurriculars, you know, a fight's broken out on the sideline, you know, and it's you, but I don't necessarily want to sit there and be like, throws a right haymaker. Like, I'm going to like carve out.
You don't go to UFC. You're not calling it like it's UFC suddenly.
Right. I'm going to carve out the exception for like hockey because like if it's ordinary to the game, it's like, all right, that's different. Like in hockey, the culture is like fighting's normalized and like there's got to be fighting and you do kind of lean into the excitement of that in some ways. Like like everyone approaches it differently. But like those moments and then streakers are actually, I think, probably the easiest of those three because you just kind of say there's an idiot on the field and they cut away and they don't show it because it's kind of it's the unspoken rule. You don't show it because you're giving them exactly what they're asking for. Which is they want the attention and they want to like distract or they want to like, you know, be the main character for 10 seconds. Like you just kind of cut away and do something like find something else to talk about and come back to it in 10 seconds once the police have wrangled them and escorted them to stadium jail. But yeah, I think it feels like every year there's always some random situation you don't see coming where you're just like, oh, like, all right, this is new. Or like, you know, it could be, I've seen other broadcasts that run into stuff like that. And I'm in awe of like how play-by-plays and colors find a way to navigate it. Like if, was it Harvard Yale where there was like a protest that stopped the game? It's like I remember there was an Ivy League game where I think they like came out to the 50-yard line and like it was like a demonstration where they stopped the whole game. And there's obviously some like political aspects to that, and like navigating that moment in what is normally such a kind of like lighthearted escapist environment. That to me feels like the ultimate challenge, like situation to navigate, is where things can get like really dicey, and how you react in that moment can have a big reaction, or can like have some blowback, or like it matters how you kind of show up in that moment. So I think it boils down to being ready and understanding like how you show up in those situations and like how to kind of navigate the moment. But I just think I think as long as you're leading with like authenticity and compassion, like not to sort of like, I don't know, oversimplify it, but like I think as long as you're kind of coming from a place of like you are like the viewer at home and you're being, relatable and honest, I think that's always a good place to work from, whether it's injuries, whether it's crazy stuff, whether it's, I don't know, a cat ran on the field, stuff like that, which, man, I live for the day that I get like a Buccaneers game situation where there's like a squirrel on the field, because that's the kind of moment that I'm like, yeah, I'm calling the cat running into the end zone and scoring a touchdown.
And I'm going viral. Like, you go viral every time.
It is like a free opportunity to get like good press for 5 days. It like not to PR-ify this, but like it's also just like those are the kind of moments you lean into the fun, where it's like, yes, an animal got into the field, but it's like it's not really
harmless.
Right. It's like it's funny because then the whole stadium's gonna like the fact that there was like a squirrel back to was it a squirrel or was it a duck?
The duck, which also is all over Buck's branding now. The duck is everywhere.
It's become an iconic moment. But I was at that game, and what was so funny is like the duck distracted not just like the teams, but it distracted us in the stands. We're all busy looking at the duck. And I remember like I was videoing the duck on the field as the ball was snapped, and then I heard reactions and I looked, and the punt's like halfway back to the end zone. I completely missed the block. TV missed the block because they're focused on the duck. And it's just like, but that's what's funny is like no one really cares the Bucs blocked a punt up like 20-something points. They care of like, dude, there's a duck on the field. Like this is the kind of like simple joys that it's like, that's what makes this job fun, is no single day is the same, and you never really know what you're gonna get. Because it's always like, it could be the silliest, goofiest like thing possible, like a duck on the field or a squirrel running into the end zone. Like I know that clip's gone viral before, like stuff like that, man. That's the good stuff.
That's funny too. I was watching that game live, and I literally remember on my couch going, "Oh, there's a duck on the field. Oh my God, they missed the snap because they were showing the duck." Like I audibly yelled that because I was like, and my dad was like, "Why are you freaking out?" And I was like, "They missed the snap because the director was on the duck."
That duck has to be like a villain to some producer for network TV out there. That duck did that to throw that like director and producer like crew under the bus of like, hey, what if we created a situation that causes you to miss the snap of an NFL football game?
Oh, that's such a good example.
I love that so much. That was iconic.
Brian, thank you for being not only our first guest, but an absolutely fabulous one.
Thank you so much for having me. This is, like I said, it feels like we're back in college. This is so fun. I cannot wait to see what guests come for. As of right now, I will enjoy my reign of holding the best guest of all time a title until the next guest.
And that's right. I know that's right.
I'm for tuning in. Champion of a league of one right now.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of How to Cook a Goose.
Peace.